Hi, hello, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourses. We're still in Book 1, the first book of the Discourses, looking today at chapter 38 over here, see? 38, which is weak republics are hardly resolute and do not know how to decide. And if they ever take up any policy, it arises more from necessity than from choice. In other words, he's going to say, the question is, irresolute states, weak republics are not resolute. They don't make choices strongly, and they very rarely know how to decide. The title begins, right? And then if they take a policy, it's usually because of necessity. They're forced to do something. In other words, necessity is outside forces forcing you to do something, versus choice out of their own activity. So let's go in here. Since in Rome there was a very grave pestilence, and because of this it appeared to the Volsci and to the Aequi that the time had come when they could crush Rome. These two peoples, having made a very large army, assaulted the Latins and the Herinici. Right? This is again. This is right from Livy 6. Right. Right from Livy 6. Livy book 3, sorry. Not Livy 6, Livy book. And as their countries were being despoiled, the Latins and the Herinici were constrained to make it understood in Rome and to beg that they be defended by the Romans. Since the Romans were burdened by disease, they replied to them that they should take up the policy of defending themselves on their own and with their arms, because they could not defend them. Right? They defend yourselves. We are not able at this time to send something. They begged that the Romans defend them. That they were kind of like. Here one recognizes the generosity and prudence of the Senate, and how in every fortune it was always wished to be one that was prince over the decisions that it is subject. In other words, again, this is to, it is its own. In other words, its own. It's literally its own. That it's its own. In other words, that it are its. Prince or master. That it was prince over the decisions that it was subject would have to make, that its own would have to make, right? So in other words, here the Senate was always want to make sure that this is their generosity and prudence of the Senate, how in every fortune it was wished to be, in every fortune it was always wished to be the one, in other words, the Senate in that sense, right? And the decider of this was that was Prince. It was how in every fortune it was always wished to be the one, that the Senate always wished to be the one that was the prince, and of this thing, not outside forces. Nor was it ever ashamed to decide a thing that was contrary to its own mode of life or to other decisions it had made when necessity commanded them to. In other words, it wasn't going to be forced to do something it thought wrong. Nor was it ever ashamed to decide a thing that was contrary to its mode of life or to other decisions it had made when necessity commanded them to. In other words, it was going to, if this is required, then we do it. Not that if it goes against our principles, it's like, well, we have to do it. Okay, it's not ashamed of that. 2, I say this because at other times the same Senate had forbidden the said people to arm and defend themselves. Those people, right? Again, this is looking at Livy 2, right? They did not, at other times, they didn't want the Latins and the Herinici to arm themselves because there was a threat. In other words, they did not want them to arm themselves. That we would defend you. So that to a Senate less prudent than this one, it would have appeared to be falling from its rank and to concede such defense to them. In other words, it said, you need to arm, you need to arm, you need to arm. We are not able to arm. So therefore, this people, by letting them arm in self-defense, this now may lead to a problem that, okay, then they become, maybe in the future they'll attack, they'll have arms, and they'll attack Rome again, or arm Rome. That the less prudent future may have said, no, don't arm, and then risk, you have a problem. Remember, Rome at this time was sick and had pestilence, right? But this one always judged things as they should be judged, and always took the less bad policy for the better. Now, again, for Prince 21, right? This is chapter 21 of the Prince. That it's always looks the best. In other words, it's always judged for the better, and took the less bad policy for the better of the two. For not being able to defend its subjects, tasted bad to it, and that they should arm themselves without them tasted bad, for the same reason, and for many others that were understood. In other words, that they both were two bad things, and that therefore it was not being able to defend them completely would be bad enough, right? Nevertheless, recognizing that they would arm themselves by necessity in any mode, since the enemy was upon them, it took the honorable part and willed that what they had to do, they would do with license from it. In other words, they're going to arm. The reality is they're going to save themselves. They're going to arm. They're going to have to arm. If we don't come do it, defend them, they're being attacked. They will defend themselves. So instead of us allowing them, they're going to do it even if we don't allow them. They'll come to that. So it's better that we allow them. So that having disobeyed by necessity, they should not become injured to disobeying by choice. In other words, they would then once they had to disobey. In other words, the danger is if we say don't, we don't allow them to arm. They will arm anyways, and he's saying the danger becomes what they will. In other words, having disobeyed by necessity, right? They should not become injured to disobeying by choice. In other words, they'll start, disobeying by choice now. They'll start disobeying by choice. They'll start. Okay, now we disobey. Then in other words, they'll get into the habit of disobeying. Although this may appear to be the policy that should be adopted by every republic, nevertheless, weak and badly consulted republics do not know how to take it up, nor do they know how to honor themselves in like necessities. In other words, that a well-counseled republic, may not know how to do this. Weak and badly counseled republics do not know how to take up this advice, that maybe the less bad choice is the best choice. And that, maybe you have to let someone, it's you don't want them to do it, but they're going to do it anyways, given the necessity. And it's perhaps better to let them do it than not having them disobey. Okay. And he gives another example. Now he moves us to talk about his current times. Duke Valentino had. I think this is Duke Valentino is I think that is Cesare, right? Had taken Finza and had made Bologna bow to his terms. This is in 501. Cesare Borgia becoming master of Romagna. On this incident, see the Machiavelli's Parole de Sapola. There's this text, right, of March 1503, and his collected works, the collected writings of Machiavelli. Okay, this is in those things. Machiavelli had a piece story about these things. When, in other words, Borgia taken the Firenze and made Bologna bow to his terms. Then, wishing to return to Rome through Tuscany, he sent a man to Florence to ask passage for himself and his army. In Florence, they consulted one another as to how one might have to govern this affair, and it was never consulted by anyone to concede it to him. In other words, don't concede it to him. Don't let him come to, he's going to, in other words, through Tuscany, and if we're no, the Florentines say, no, that's our land. And he's going to go through it, and the question is, and it was never consulted by anyone to concede it to him, allow him to go transfer it to her. In this, one did not follow the Roman mode. For since the Duke was very well armed, and the Florentines so unarmed, that they could not prevent him from passing through, it was much more to their honor that he should appear to pass by their will rather than by force. Because, while it was altogether their reproach, it would have been less so in part if they had conducted it otherwise. In other words, they would have, in other words, they couldn't resist them. They just really, they had no army. They were poorly armed. So they say no, but they have no means really to stop him if he chooses. Okay. But the worst part that weak republics takes is to be irresolute. In other words, not only do they make bad choices, they don't make they refuse to make a choice, so that all the policies they take up are taken up by force. And if any good comes to be done by them, they do it forced, not by their prudence. In other words, they can't make up their mind. The weak states are unable to decide something. They're completely unable to decide. And because they're unable to decide, things happen. In other words, they're thrust upon them. And they're taken up by force. They're forced to address it. And if any good comes out to it, it's not because they chose it. It's because it's forced on them. It's forced, and they got lucky and they won in that sense, right? It was because it was forced. It was necessity that external things forced them. Thus, this was not an example of their prudence. In other words, that prudence did not give a good result. In other words, it is by chance or by circumstance. I wish to give two other examples of this that occurred in our time, in the state of our city. In 1500, when King Louis XII of France had retaken Milan, he was desirous of turning over Pisa to Florence, so as to have the 50,000 ducat that had been promised to him by the Florentines after the resolutions. He sent his armies towards Pisa, captained by Monsieur de Beaumont, who, though French, was nevertheless a man whom the Florentines trusted very much. This army and this captain took themselves between the Castina and Pisa, so as to go into combat against the walls. As they waited there for some days, so as to order themselves for the storming, Pisan spokesmen came to Beaumont and offered him to give the city to the French army, with this pact, that he promised by the faith of the king not to put it in the hands of the Florentines before the end of 4 months. In other words, we'll surrender it, but you can't give it to the Florentines for 4 months. This policy was altogether rejected by the Florentines, with the result that they took the field and left it the same. In other words, nor was the policy rejected for any other cause than that they distrusted the faith of the king. as those who through the weakness of the council, a weakness of their council, had put themselves by force in his hands. In other words, they said, no, I'm gonna surrender to you, but we'll do it, and you have to wait 4 months. And the Florentines said, no, we're gonna go out there and we're gonna do this. Now, why? Because they didn't trust the king. They thought the king would, once it was in his hands, he might like this. And he says, but the problem is they relied on the king to do this deed. On the other hand, they did not trust him. Nor did they see how much better it was for the king to be able to turn to Pisa over to them when he was inside it. And if he did not turn it over to uncover his intent, than for him to be able to promise it to them when he did not have it, and for them to be forced to buy those promises. In other words, they had promises. In other words, they were forced to buy those promises, he says. So in other words, it would have been better to let him do it and then see if he keeps his word or not, rather than paying him to do this, to give him that promising one thing but not yet doing it, right? So they would have acted much more profitably if they had consented that Beaumont take it under any promise whatsoever, as experience later showed in 1502, when Monsieur Imbold was sent by the King of France with French troops to aid the Florentines after Arezzo rebelled. Again, see the incident in Machiavelli's book, The Modes of the Tartara, Papra, Delta, and this rebellion, right? The modes of treating a rebel people of the Lanza, right? And his works, The King of France was still Louis X, right? Same king. So one time they didn't trust the king, the second time they trust the king. When he arrived near Arezzo, after a short time, he began to negotiate with accords with the Artians, who'd wished to give over the towns under a certain pledge. Faith, under a certain little promise, as had the Pisans. The policy was rejected in Florence. Seeing this, Monsieur Imbold began to hold negotiations for an accord by himself, without the participation of the commissioners, since it was apparent to him that the Florentines understood little of this, what was going on. They were, oh my God, they're idiots. In other words, so Monsieur Imbold just decided to, okay, ignore the Florentines. We're going to just do this without them. So he conducted it. This story. This is reminding me what happened a couple days ago in America with Zelensky and the White House. And you want to know why Zelensky is not being invited to negotiations? That was an example. That he is an incompetent and an unstable decider, who doesn't know what's in his interest. His interest was to sign the deal. What does he do? Makes a scene, makes it impossible. Oh, I'm going to do what I want, and therefore, but he's going to still sign the deal. No. An irresolute decision is disastrous. And the example of the question of the Florentines and their weakness, their inability to make a clear deciding. And Machiavelli's a Florentine, and he's a member of state. He's self-criticizing here. And he may not be part of the person who had his way in the decision, but it's the Florentines and their inability to make resolute decisions. In other words, they rejected this, and then the Monsieur said, okay, began to hold negotiations for an accord by himself, right? Because they're going to do it without it. Because why? Because the Florentines understood little of this politics. So he concluded it in his own mode, and under it entered Arezzo with his troops, giving the Florentines to understand that they were mad and did not understand worldly things. For if they'd wished for Arezzo, they should have made it. They should have made it understood to the king, who could give it to them much better if he had his troops inside the city than outside. Gives them, in other words, okay, in other words, this is an example. This is hilarious. He's saying, you don't understand. The Florentines don't understand. They're mad, and they don't understand. Zelensky is mad and doesn't understand worldly things, political things. Because he's been used to getting his way in that sense. The reality hit, necessity hit in a certain reality here. As they wish for Arezzo, they should have made it understood to the king, who could have given it to them much better if he had his troops inside the city than outside. In Florence, they did not stop tearing up and blaming the said Imblut, nor did they ever stop until at last it was recognized that if Beaumont had been like Ilmud, they would have had the Pisa as well as the Arezzo. They would have, if they shut the fuck up and did this, they would have gotten their advantage. Okay, exactly. The Zelensky behavior in the Oval Office is an example of what Machiavelli's talking about here. Someone who's fucked in the head, who doesn't know their interest. They want something, but don't know the way to get it. Now, and the problem here is this is what happens here. This is that if they shut up, they would have. If they just trusted the Beaumont, not only are they getting they come bitching and moaning about blaming the said Emba, but they got what they damn want eventually. They got the advantage. And if they, in other words, if they now, and they, until at last it recognized that if Beaumont had been like Ilbut, they would have had Pisa as well as Azero. So to return to our point, irresolute, hence why the resolute desk, right? That's a joke. Irresolute republics, never take up. Irresolute republics never take up good policies unless by force. See, Zelensky is not a real See, I mean, I want to go into point. I'll say this. One of the big problems with Zelensky is he's unwilling to make some. Say he stood up there, but in the current war now, 2005, in 2004. He refused. He fired his chief general, who's now currently the ambassador in UK, because he wanted to basically start drafting the young population, 18 to 21, and maybe even recall from outside Europe, the Ukrainian men, combat-age men, to come back and get the Europeans to kind of push them back in order to do in the front lines, to combat. Because his argument is we need more troops, and if we're going to do offensive operations to retake the land, recapture the land back to what would happen in 2014, you're going to need 10 to 1, 12 to 1 advantage over the Russians in those areas. And the Ukrainians, in other words, defenders, the Russians, even if they're taking huge losses, they're still having, to be able to make any kind of attack there, they'd have to have a significant advantage and significant casualties. And the Zelensky was unwilling. He thinks, we're going to get sneaky advantages, sneaky things. But the problem is, once the Russians had set up certain things, you're not going to get that. So this is, in other words, force does it. The irresolute never take up some unless force, because of their weakness, allows them to decide whether there is any doubt. In other words, and if that doubt is not suppressed by violence that drives on them, they will remain in suspense. In other words, they're not going to end this war. In other words, they think they have under hope that they can win, but that's going to diminish in short time. So, I mean, this is the problem about this kind of reality. You have to make if you're dealt with force, you're someone who deals with force. In other words, someone who's going to be irresolute, unable to stand on their own and act, to deliver on their own, to do this on their own, stand on their own, but they depend upon others. They're dependent upon external things. Therefore, that's force, the force, external force. When external force tells you, okay, we want to, you need to end this war. No, we're going to continue this war. No. In other words, this is the danger of what Machiavelli says here. That irresolute republics never take up good policies unless by force. Because their weakness never allows them to decide whether there is any doubt. In other words, their weakness puts them in a situation where they will never make a decision on this because they're afraid. Doubt drives them. And if that doubt is not suppressed by violence, external force outside of them, that drives them on, the violence drives them on, they will remain in suspense. They will simply just won't make a decision. Well, therefore, we stop here. We end this here. If you have any comments or questions, please put it here. If you've liked the thing, hit the like button. It helps. Like button. Okay, so if you have any comments, questions, put it in there. I will respond to them when I see them. If you like it, hit the like button. If you also thing is if you not subscribe, please subscribe. But if you liked it, share it also. So share it far and wide. Share it on social media. Share it on your mail. Show your friends. And last, if you're not subscribed, again, please subscribe. And encourage your others to subscribe. Sorry, I got hiccups a little bit. Now, another thing you can do is if you didn't like it, you thought that I didn't like something that was said here or argued here, you can thumb down it, but say why in the comments so people can benefit and learn. Maybe you disagree that the example I added from recent experience is one suitable to this question. But put your comment in there. If you want to follow me on social media, the social media links are below. If you want to know more about me as a researcher and a scholar, you can find my academic social media links below. And if you want to help me do what I do, you can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar, or buying one of my books that listed below through either your local bookstore, an online distributor like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc., or through the publishers directly. Well, that's it. Take care, and we'll turn to the next chapter tomorrow. Bye-bye.